I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by piles of documents and folders that seemed to have a life of their own. The smell of aged paper and the soft whir of the overhead fan created an atmosphere of nostalgia and monotony. I, Jake, a skeptical lawyer, spent my days immersed in cases that felt as far removed from the supernatural as I could imagine. The afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, and the city of Willow Creek unfolded outside, peaceful, but I knew something was stirring beneath the surface. It was then that my phone rang, interrupting my daydream. I looked at the screen and saw her name, Emily. The historian who had caught my attention in recent weeks, not for her books and articles, but for her peculiar obsession with a subject I considered mere folklore. She had read about a series of strange events at the local cemetery and was apparently determined to investigate. "Jake! I'm so glad I found you!" Emily exclaimed with enthusiasm as soon as I answered. Her voice was laced with contagious energy, but there was also a tone of urgency that intrigued me. "Hey, Emily! What's going on? You sound excited," I replied, trying to mask my skepticism. "I need your help. You won't believe what's happening at the cemetery. The graves are opening up. And the townsfolk are terrified," she said, almost breathless. "Oh, sure. Open graves. That's something I'd only hear in a horror movie," I retorted, half joking, but a part of me was starting to get interested. "Listen, Jake. This isn't a joke. I went there and saw it with my own eyes. I don't know what's going on, but something is very wrong. You have to come with me, please," she insisted, her voice now more serious. I felt a wave of reluctance. I didn't believe in ghosts, much less in supernatural events. But there was something in Emily's voice that made me hesitate. "Look, Emily, I'm a lawyer. I'm not exactly the best person to investigate paranormal phenomena. But you're a skeptic, and that's exactly what we need. You can help me understand what's happening. We need to look at the records, the stories. I promise you won't regret it," she said, her voice filled with conviction. I took a deep breath, thinking of the countless reasons I should refuse. But at the same time, there was a calling in her tone that I couldn't ignore. "Okay, fine. I'll go with you. But only to prove that there's nothing supernatural going on." "Great. Can we meet in an hour?" she asked, her excitement almost palpable. "Yeah, see you soon," I replied, hanging up the phone with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The drive to the cemetery was silent. I was driving, trying to organize my thoughts. The sky was overcast, and the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Fog began to form, enveloping the trees and gravestones as we approached. Willow Creek Cemetery was a place I had always considered a space of peace, but now, as we entered, the feeling was that the environment was laden with unspoken secrets. Emily was beside me, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She seemed completely at ease in that environment, as if she were at home. I, on the other hand, felt increasingly uncomfortable, as if I were intruding on a territory that didn't belong to me. As soon as we parked, I got out of the car and looked around. Ancient, moss-covered gravestones rose in rows, and the fog seemed to dance around them, as if the dead were whispering secrets. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the tombstones. "Do you feel that?" Emily asked, her voice low. "I feel like we need to hurry." "I don't want to be here longer than necessary," I replied, trying to keep a humorous tone, but my voice betrayed a slight tremor. "Let's just take a look." "I promise we won't stay long," she said, already walking toward a group of gravestones. I followed her reluctantly, watching as she approached a gravestone that appeared older than the others. "Look at this, Jake. Check out the inscriptions. These stories are fascinating," she exclaimed, touching the cold stone with her fingers. "Stories, yes. But that's all they are, stories," I murmured, still skeptical. But as she began reading the inscriptions aloud, something in her voice captured my attention. Maria Thompson, passed away in 1872, victim of a mysterious fire. They say she still wanders here, seeking justice, Emily read, her eyes shining with emotion. Justice? For a fire that happened over a century ago? I asked, trying to maintain a neutral expression, but the story began to intrigue me. Yes, there are many cases like this. What do you think happens to souls that can't find peace? They become trapped in this place, she said, her voice full of conviction. I paused, looking around. The cemetery had a heavy presence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more here. Okay, let's keep going. But only because you're so excited, I conceded, trying not to give too much space to my own thoughts. As we continued walking, the fog seemed to thicken, wrapping around us like a shroud. Each step we took left me feeling more unsettled. I looked down at the ground, trying to focus on Emily's words when suddenly something caught my attention. Wait, I said, stopping abruptly. Did you see that? Emily turned, her eyes wide. What? Over there. There's an open grave. I pointed, my heart racing in my chest. There was indeed a gravestone that had been displaced, revealing the empty space that once held a body. Oh my God, you're right, she said, cautiously approaching. Adrenaline surged through my veins as we moved toward the grave. A chill ran down my spine, as if something were watching us. Are you sure we should be doing this? I asked, doubt creeping into my mind. We need to find out what happened here. It's all part of the story, she replied, already crouching down to look into the dugout grave. The darkness seemed to swallow me as I approached. What was I about to see? Doubt and fear began to mix in my mind, but curiosity was stronger. I looked inside and saw only darkness. The emptiness of the grave echoed in my thoughts, and for a moment, I thought I could hear the whispers of the dead. Jake, look! Emily exclaimed, her voice trembling with excitement. The inscriptions on the gravestone. They're fading. How is that possible? I asked, beginning to feel a chill of fear. Maybe because someone is trying to hide the truth. We need to find out what happened here, she replied, and for the first time, I saw determination in her eyes. The atmosphere was charged with electricity, and I knew we were about to enter a world that challenged all my beliefs. All right, let's investigate. But if this gets too weird, we're leaving, okay? I suggested, trying to maintain some control over the situation. Agreed, she smiled, but there was an intensity in her gaze that made me feel like we were only beginning to scratch the surface of something much larger. And so, in that fog-shrouded cemetery, with open graves and lurking mysteries, I set aside my skepticism, at least for a moment, and let myself be guided by curiosity in Emily's determination. Whatever lay hidden in that place, we were about to uncover it. The thick fog that enveloped the cemetery seemed to have a life of its own, wrapping the gravestones in a shroud of mystery and fear. As I stepped out of the car, I felt the penetrating dampness on my skin and the cold air wrapping around me like an uncomfortable embrace. Emily was beside me, her eyes sparkling with excitement, while I felt increasingly uneasy. The stories I had heard about the cemetery, told in whispers and furtive glances, flooded my mind, and even my skepticism could not ignore the heavy atmosphere in the air. Jake, look how interesting this is! Emily exclaimed, pointing to an ornate gravestone. This date, hashtag, it's over 100 years old. Don't you find that fascinating? Fascinating, maybe, but also chilling, I replied, trying to suppress the tremor in my voice. These stories about graves opening and spirits haunting people are just, well, stories. The human mind can be more terrifying than any ghost. Oh, you and your skepticism. Emily laughed, but there was a glimmer of nervousness in her eyes. Just because you don't believe in ghosts doesn't mean they don't exist. Look at this. She approached a tombstone, delicately touching the cold stone. The stories of Willow Creek are all right here, Jake. We need to understand what happened. I followed her, feeling a chill run down my spine, not just from the temperature but from the growing sensation that we were being watched. The silence was absolute, and even the sounds of nature seemed to have quieted in respect for the dead resting there. The only sound was the soft whisper of the breeze passing through the cypress trees, as if the very spirits were murmuring ancient secrets. "Look, this grave is open." Emily pointed, her voice now a whisper. I followed her gaze, and my heart raced at the sight of the dark, empty hole where a coffin once lay. The space seemed exposed to the moonlight, like a secret that had been forcibly revealed. "This is strange," I murmured, my anxiety escalating. "Why would someone dig up a grave? That's not normal. Or maybe someone was buried here who shouldn't have been," Emily suggested, her eyes fixed on the opening. "We have to investigate." "Emily, wait a minute. It could be dangerous." Caution took hold of me, but she had already moved closer to the grave, examining the loose soil around it. "Look, the dirt doesn't seem to have been disturbed in a long time," she said, bending down to touch the remnants of earth. "This is very recent. Someone did this recently. Or someone is trying to hide something," I said, the feeling of unease intensifying. A shiver ran down my spine, and for a moment, I thought about pulling her back. But Emily's curiosity was contagious, and even though I wanted to protest, the idea of discovering something extraordinary drew me in. "Jake, let's read the inscriptions on the tombstones. There might be something that helps us understand what's going on," Emily suggested, standing up and pulling me away from the open grave. We moved among the tombstones, and Emily began to read the names and dates aloud. "Look, here's the grave of a soldier from the Civil War. He died in battle. And here, a woman who perished in a fire. The stories are so tragic, aren't they?" "Yes, tragic," I replied, but the idea that these stories could be linked to what was happening made me uneasy. "But we can't let that fool us, Emily. This is just history. We don't have to get lost in fantasies." Her expression changed, and I realized that the hope she had of finding something supernatural was beginning to fade. "You don't understand, Jake. Each of these people has a story. What if, just what if, they need our help?" "Need help? How?" "They're dead, Emily. We can't help the dead. No matter how tragic their stories are, we can't change the past. We can't, but we can give them a voice," she insisted, her eyes shining with determination. "We can tell their stories, we can bring to light what has been hidden. Imagine the difference that would make." What she said resonated within me, and although I wanted to resist the idea, something inside me began to question. What if there was something more? Something beyond what we could see or understand? The cemetery, with its mist and tombstones, felt filled with secrets, and the thought that these souls might be crying out for justice started to haunt me. As we walked, an unsettling feeling settled in. The air was heavy, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being watched. I looked around, and the mist seemed to close in, as if trying to envelop us. "Jake, are you okay?" Emily asked, noticing my tense expression. "I'm fine. Just a bit apprehensive," I replied, trying to mask my fear. "This place has a strange energy. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The cemetery has a living history, and the souls here might be trying to communicate," she said, almost in a whisper, as if fearing to disturb something beyond us. "Let's move away a bit, then," I suggested, trying to maintain my sanity. "Maybe we can find a tombstone that's less intimidating." Agreeing, we started to distance ourselves from the open grave, but the feeling of being watched persisted, as if the eyes of all those who lay there were fixed on us. The silence was almost deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were delving into something we shouldn't. Eventually, we found an older tombstone, covered in moss and lichen, almost forgotten by time. "This is the grave of someone named Elias Thornton," Emily read aloud. "He died in 1885. It seems the town was in turmoil at the time of his death. Maybe his story will help us understand what's going on, I suggested, pausing. What do you know about him? I don't know much, but I've heard some stories about him, Emily replied, her gaze fixed on the tombstone. They say he was a philanthropist, but he was also seen as a controversial figure. Some people believed he was involved in something darker. Like what? I asked, intrigued. Some say he had a connection to a political scandal. Something that could have cost lives. But in the end, he became a victim too, Emily replied, her tone heavy with sadness. So, maybe the town has reasons to hide the truth, I murmured, thinking aloud. But what does this have to do with the grave's opening? Maybe the truth about him and others is finally coming to the surface, Emily suggested, her eyes shining with a mix of determination and fear. We need to find out more. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Emily, I confessed, looking around, feeling the weight of the mist and silence. What if we're digging into something we shouldn't? What if this is more than just old stories? But what if we can bring justice? The truth is powerful, Jake. And even if we're scared, we can't ignore this, she said, her voice firm and resolute. There was something in her conviction that touched me. I could feel the tension in the air, a growing expectation that seemed to surround us. And although my skepticism made me hesitate, the idea that we could help unveil the truth and give a voice to those who could no longer speak began to resonate within me. Okay, let's find out more, I agreed, even though a chill still left me uneasy. But we need to be careful. We don't know what else we might encounter here. Emily smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Let's do this together, Jake. We're here to uncover the truth. And so, with the mist enveloping us like a cloak, we decided to continue our search for answers, aware that the story we were about to unravel could be more than just simple tales of a forgotten past. Sitting amid the dense fog of the cemetery, I felt the atmosphere grow even heavier. Emily, with her determined gaze, was leaning over an ancient tombstone, the weak afternoon light barely illuminating what lay before us. The silence felt palpable, interrupted only by the sound of our careful steps on the damp grass. I still struggled against disbelief, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was about to happen. Jake, have you read about this tomb? Emily asked, pointing to a moss-covered gravestone. They say it belonged to a very influential politician in the town. Politicians, stories, it's all just folklore, I replied, trying to maintain my skeptical stance. There's nothing that proves these strange events have any connection to the supernatural. She turned to me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. But what if there is? Look around us, Jake. The graves are opening, and the townsfolk are terrified. ###, we need to understand what's happening. Before I could respond, a biting wind suddenly arose from nowhere, making the leaves on the trees dance frantically. It was at that moment that I saw it. A figure, almost like a blur, began to materialize before us. I froze. Emily, on the other hand, was so stunned that she couldn't move. Emily! I shouted, pulling her back, trying to protect her from the presence that seemed to be emerging from the ground. The spirit, or whatever it was, floated closer to us, its vaporous form illuminated by a supernatural light. The air around us seemed to stir, and an intense chill ran down my spine. Do not be afraid, the figure said, its voice echoing like a distant whisper. I do not come to do harm. I come in search of justice. Emily looked at me, her eyes wide. Jake, can you see this? It's real. Yes, I see it. But that doesn't mean I believe it, I replied, my voice wavering. The spirit seemed to draw closer, and the expression on its face was a mix of sadness and rage. I am Thomas Bellington, a politician who was betrayed and murdered, the figure said, its voice now clearer. My death was a covered-up crime, and the dead cry out for help. The entire city is stained by silence and fear. A politician? A covered-up crime? I murmured, trying to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Why are you here now? Because the past cannot be buried. The truth must be revealed, he replied, and his image seemed to glow with greater intensity. Those who fear facing the truth are the ones who perpetuate the curse. You feel it, don't you? The weight of the dead, the pain of those who left without justice. Emily was silent, absorbing every word. What can we do? She finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. You need to investigate. The truth is hidden in the shadows of the city. Look for old records, documents that have been erased. I am not the only one who cries out for justice. Others also wait for someone to have the courage to expose what happened, Thomas said, his presence appearing to solidify. But how can we believe you? I protested, still battling disbelief. This could be an illusion, a trick of the mind. Jake, Emily interrupted me, he doesn't seem to be here to harm us. Look at him. There's pain in his eyes, and he wants us to uncover the truth. We need to know what happened to you, Thomas. What really happened? I asked, trying to focus. Tell us more about what you know. I was accused of corruption, but it was a setup, he replied, his voice now more urgent. My colleagues betrayed me, and an innocent man paid the price for my death. The entire city is involved in this cover-up. They fear the truth, they fear that their secrets will be exposed. But this truth must come to light, and only you can do it. We're listening, Emily said, her determination growing. We will find out the truth. Where do we start? Start at the local library. The records are there, hidden beneath layers of lies. The story has been written in a way that protects the guilty. You must find them and bring to light what was done, Thomas said, his figure beginning to fade slowly. I will help you, but you must have courage. Silence is what feeds the curse. Do not be afraid to face what is to come. Wait. I shouted, but he was already dissipating into the mist, his form dissolving like smoke. The cold feeling evaporated, but the unease remained. I looked at Emily, who was pale, but her eyes sparkled with a newfound determination. Jake, we need to go to the library. We need to uncover the truth, she said, her voice firm. Yes, but, what if this is all a trap? What if we're just getting into something much bigger than we can handle? I retorted, still grappling with confusion in my mind. If we do nothing, the dead will continue to cry for justice. And if what Thomas said is true, we need to give a voice to these lost souls. We can't ignore this, Emily replied, already starting to move. I fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation beginning to weigh on me. The skepticism I had always carried was wavering against the urgency of the moment. All right, let's go. But we need to proceed with caution. Thus, we left the cemetery, the feeling that something monumental was about to happen lingering in the air. I didn't know what to expect at the library, but the connection to the past was becoming impossible to ignore. As we walked away, the mist seemed to whisper, as if the dead were watching us, waiting for us to do what was right. The revelation of the spirit had left a deep mark on me, a crack in my skepticism that, despite my attempts to ignore it, was starting to widen. As I watched Emily, I realized that the light in her eyes shone with an almost insatiable curiosity, a spark that I couldn't share. What I saw as a threat, she viewed as an opportunity. The tension between us was palpable, but not in a negative way. It was as if an invisible force was binding us together, pushing us toward a fate we could not avoid. Jake, she began, her voice filled with determination, this is bigger than us. We need to understand what happened. We need to help these spirits. She looked at the open grave, her expression heavy with empathy. They are crying out for justice, and we have a chance to give them a voice. I hesitated. Emily, do you really believe we can solve this? That we are the ones chosen to unravel the mysteries of the past? This is too much for us. The disbelief in my voice was evident. What I truly wanted was to return to the safety of my desk, surrounded by cases I knew I could solve, not by ghosts and the secrets of a city that seemed to be crumbling beneath our feet. That's why we need to go to the library, she insisted, her tone more resolute. We need to discover more about this politician and what really happened. Maybe there's information that can help us understand the curse he mentioned. A library, then? I asked, trying to find an excuse not to go. Wouldn't it be safer to stay here? The cemetery has already given us enough trouble for one day. Jake, you can't ignore this, she countered, with a look that mixed frustration and concern. These spirits are crying for help, and if we don't do anything, who will? We can't just go back to our normal lives knowing that something is wrong here. The force of her conviction hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew I couldn't simply dismiss what I had seen. So, with a resigned sigh, I nodded. All right. Let's go to the library. The journey to the library was filled with an unsettling silence. The road was lined with tall trees that seemed to lean in toward us, as if they were listening to our conversations. The fog that had enveloped the cemetery had dissipated, but the sense that something was about to happen continued to linger in the air. When we arrived, the library was almost empty. The atmosphere was warm, yet there was an aura of mystery in every corner. The smell of old books and yellowed paper wrapped around us as soon as we stepped inside. Emily seemed at home there. She headed straight for the local history section, her eyes shining with anticipation. Let's see what we can find about the politician, she said, beginning to scan the books for anything that might help us. I ran my hand along the spines of the books, feeling the worn texture. What was his name again? I asked. Charles Montgomery, Emily replied, already holding a book open in her hands. He was an influential politician in the city and, apparently, involved in a major scandal before his death. Scandal? I echoed, trying to recall conversations I had heard about him over the years. What exactly happened? Well, she began, flipping through the pages. He was accused of corruption and covering up the death of an innocent man. The case was deliberately hushed up, and many believe he was murdered to silence him. Hashtag, this is heavy, I murmured, contemplating how everything connected to what we had seen at the cemetery. Do you think his spirit is here because of this? To tell us the truth? Yes. Emily's excitement was contagious. If we can figure out what really happened, maybe we can help not just him, but all the others who are trapped here. Her enthusiasm was like a magnet, pulling me closer to the mystery. Is there anything else you think we can find here? I asked, trying to engage in the research. Definitely, she said, scanning the shelves. I think we should look for old newspapers. They might have information about what happened back then and even about how the town dealt with it. Can you check the archives while I keep looking here? Sure, I agreed, trying to hide my reluctance. But don't forget to call me if you find anything relevant. Emily nodded and focused on the pages. I made my way to the archives section, where I found an old microfilm machine. The process of handling those reels and reading news from decades past was challenging, but I was determined to find something that could help us. After some time, I finally stumbled upon an article that caught my attention. The headline read, Politician Charles Montgomery involved in corruption scandal and suspicious death. My heart began to race as I read the article, which detailed Montgomery's life, his political campaigns, and the accusations he faced. Emily. I called, unable to contain my excitement. Look at this. She quickly approached, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. What did you find? She asked, leaning over my shoulder. Check this out, I pointed to the article. It says Montgomery was about to reveal something important about the murder of an innocent man, but he disappeared before he could do it. And there's a quote from one of his allies claiming the town was involved in a cover-up. Emily read aloud, and the gravity of her words became even more apparent. Local authorities were involved in a major scheme to silence anyone trying to expose the truth. Montgomery had information that could dismantle an entire system of corruption. This is shocking, I murmured, trying to process the discovery. If this is true, then the town really has a dark past. Yes, and it only confirms what the spirit told us, Emily replied thoughtfully. We need to keep investigating. If we find more information, maybe we can convince the town to face this truth. But how will we do that? I asked, doubt starting to creep into my mind. The town doesn't want to hear about this, and people are scared. We can just tell them what we found, she said, determined. We can't let fear stop them from facing the truth. If the dead are crying out for justice, we can't ignore them. I slowly nodded, the idea of revealing the truth starting to take shape in my mind. But a sense of unease lingered. And what if it just makes things worse? What if the spirits become even more agitated? Then we'll have to face that, she replied, her voice resolute. But we can't just stand still. We have to act. The weight of her words hung in the air, and what had once been simple curiosity now transformed into a mission. The connection with the town and its past was revealing itself as a tangled web of secrets we needed to unravel. As we continued our research, the tension between us grew, an invisible thread binding our fates in ways we didn't yet understand. As we reviewed the old records in the library, a growing sense of unease settled in my chest. I never imagined that a simple visit to the cemetery could trigger such profound and disturbing discoveries. Emily was so engrossed in her research, her eyes shining as she analyzed every detail, that I almost forgot the tension that loomed over us. But then, something hit me like a lightning bolt. My own family had a connection to this dark past. It left me unsettled. Jake, are you okay? Emily asked, interrupting my thoughts. She looked up from the documents, concern etched on her face. Actually, no. I found something that got me thinking, I replied, trying to articulate my words. I was reviewing some of the stories here and realized that one of the names mentioned was from my family. Emily furrowed her brow. Really? What does the document say? It's a report about a murder case that happened decades ago. A man named Thomas Morgan, who, from what I'm seeing, was a distant relative, I said, my fingers trembling slightly as I touched the yellowed paper. He was wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit, and that led to a huge cover-up in the town. This is incredible, Jake. You have to dig deeper into this. It might be connected to everything that's happening, Emily insisted, her excitement shining through. It might be, but that doesn't change the fact that my family could have been part of this cover-up. It makes me. I don't know, confused, I confessed, running my hand over my face and feeling the weight of the family history. I understand. But remember, the past doesn't define who we are today, she said with an encouraging smile. You can use this information to help clarify things. After all, you're not the same person you were before, right? You're here now, ready to uncover the truth. Yeah, but this is more complicated than it seems, I murmured, shaking my head. I just didn't expect my family to be involved in something so dark. Hey, we all have secrets in our families. But that doesn't mean you should carry their weight. Let's uncover the truth together. Emily's determined gaze gave me a bit of confidence, so I resolved to move forward. As we continued to research, Emily began to tell me about her own family. Did you know my grandmother was involved in the mysteries of Willow Creek? She always talked about things that happened here, but never told me everything. When I was a kid, I used to hear her speak of spirits and supernatural things. But I thought they were just stories to scare me, she said, a nostalgic gleam in her eyes. Are you saying your grandmother had some connection to these events we're investigating? I asked, intrigued. Yes. When my grandmother passed away, I found some letters and diaries that talked about a scandal involving the town. She mentioned a politician who was involved in something much bigger than anyone could imagine. I just didn't know it was this serious, Emily revealed, her expression growing somber. This is unsettling. So maybe our stories are more intertwined than we thought, I said, feeling a knot form in my stomach. If your grandmother was involved, it could mean there's much more at stake here. Yes, and that's why we need to uncover the truth. We can't let the past continue to haunt the town, she replied, determined. We need to understand what happened, Jake. It might be the only way to help the spirits that are crying out for justice. A wave of determination washed over me as we spoke. The weight of history was becoming a responsibility I could no longer ignore. The past, with its betrayals and secrets, was no longer a distant shadow. It was alive, pulsating in every conversation we had. Emily, what do you think we should do now? I asked, looking into her eyes. We're so involved in this, but we need to be cautious. The town might not take well to what we're about to uncover. We need to be honest with people. We can't let fear stop them from seeing the truth. If your family and mine are connected to this, maybe it's time to face what happened. If the dead are crying out for justice, then it's our duty to listen to them, she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. You're right. But at the same time, I'm worried about what this might mean for us. Hashtag, we might end up messing with something we don't know how to handle, I said, concern weighing in my voice. Emily smiled slightly, even with the tension in the air. Jake, we're in this together. Besides, you're not alone. I have things to face as well. The connection between our families can give us strength to deal with this. We can't let the past stop us from doing what's right. Okay, let's find out what more we can discover about our ancestors and how they connect to all of this. But we need to be careful. If the town is involved in a cover-up, then we can't trust just anyone, I said, feeling the adrenaline start to flow through my veins. Yes, and we need to go back to the cemetery. There's something there we still don't fully understand. We must confront the spirits and find out what they really want from us, Emily replied, her voice steady. The weight of the history unfolding before us was overwhelming, but it was also an opportunity. A chance to restore truth and justice. And as I thought about all of this, I realized my life would never be the same. The revelations we were about to uncover weren't just about the town or the dead. They were about us, our pasts, and what it meant to face the unknown. Let's move forward, Emily. Let's discover the truth and, who knows, maybe free not only the spirits but also our own families from the burden of the past, I declared, feeling determination grow within me. Yes, Jake. We're in this together. Let's unravel the mysteries of Willow Creek and bring to light the truth that desperately needs to be revealed, she replied, her indomitable spirit reflecting the light of hope in her eyes. With a new sense of purpose, we left the library. The road ahead was filled with uncertainties, but we had a clear objective, to uncover the truth and finally give a voice to those who had been silenced by history. And so, with the echoes of the dead in our hearts, we set out towards what would prove to be a confrontation with the past that would shape our future. The decision to return to the cemetery weighed on my mind as we drove. The sky was overcast, and the temperature seemed to drop with every mile we passed. Emily was beside me, her face reflecting a mix of determination and apprehension. I, on the other hand, was battling a growing sense that we were about to step into dangerous territory. Do you think we'll find more spirits? I asked, trying to keep my tone light, but my voice betrayed my nervousness. I don't know, Jake. But we need to understand what's happening. That figure we saw. She hesitated, clearly recalling the spirit of the politician. He seemed so desperate. I parked the car near the entrance of the cemetery, and the fog now appeared denser than before. The trees were almost invisible, shrouded in a veil of mist. The cemetery looked even more ominous at night, and my skeptical mind struggled to rationalize the situation. They're just stories, I repeated to myself, but the unease in my stomach wouldn't go away. Let's go, Emily said, taking my hand and pulling me out of the car. We need to be brave. The atmosphere was charged, as if the very air was waiting for something. We walked together, and each step seemed to echo in an oppressive silence. The moonlight barely penetrated the fog, and the gravestones rose like shadows, each guarding secrets that should never be revealed. Look, Emily pointed to a cluster of old gravestones. Those are more worn. There might be something there. We approached, and suddenly I felt a cold breeze that didn't seem natural. A shiver ran down my spine, and I looked around, expecting to see something. Emily began reading the names on the gravestones, her voice soft against the somberness of the place. "Here's one," she said, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and fear. Margaret Hargrove, 1872 to 1935. Beloved mother, who always fought for justice. What do you think that means? I asked, half intrigued and half impatient. I don't know, but we might find clues. She turned to me, her gaze piercing. We need to connect with these stories. It was then that the fog began to stir, as if something was moving through it. A shadow emerged, and a spectral figure began to materialize. Emily froze, her eyes wide with terror. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't hesitate. I pulled her back, instinctively protecting her. The spirit approached, its indistinct form floating above the ground, and I could feel an intense cold emanating from its presence. "What do you want?" My voice sounded firmer than I felt. It was almost a shout, but I tried to stay calm. The figure seemed to hesitate, but then began to speak, its voice echoing like a whisper among the leaves of the trees. "Justice." The word dragged out, as if each syllable was carrying the weight of centuries. "I cry for justice." "Who are you?" Emily finally spoke, her voice wavering but filled with curiosity. "Why are you here?" "I am Elias Thornton, a politician, a man deceived. My death was not an accident." The figure hovered before us, its expression a mix of pain and indignation. "I was a victim of a scandal, covered up by those who should have brought the truth to light." My heart raced. Those words echoed in my mind, and I realized that what we were facing was much bigger than mere ghost stories. There was a sense of urgency in Elias's voice, and the story he was telling seemed intertwined with what we already knew. "What do you want from us?" I asked, trying to maintain control. "You," he replied, his voice now stronger. "You must reveal the truth. The dead are crying out for help. The silence of the town feeds on our pain." I looked at Emily and saw that she was affected just as much as I was. Her expression had changed, and there was a growing determination in her eyes. I knew she was starting to believe, and that put me in conflict. I was still struggling with my skepticism, but the need to help, to understand, was stronger. "How can we help?" Emily asked, her voice now steady. "What do we need to do?" Elias seemed to perk up at the question, and his form began to glow faintly, as if hope was starting to fill him. "Find my diary," he said, gesturing with an ethereal hand. "It contains the truth about what happened. It is hidden in the heart of the cemetery. But beware, the darkness feeds on fear." My heart raced at hearing this. The heart of the cemetery? What did that mean? And more importantly, how could we find that diary? "Can you guide us?" I asked, feeling desperation grow inside me. The thought of facing the darkness, of digging deeper into secrets I never wanted to know, was terrifying. Elias hesitated. The light in his face began to fade, and the fog wrapped around his outline. "Time is short," he murmured, his voice becoming more distant. "You must act quickly. Don't let fear hold you back. The truth needs to be revealed." Elias began to dissipate, and I reached out, trying to grasp him. "Wait! Don't go!" I shouted, but he had already vanished into the fog. "Jake!" Emily said, her voice trembling. "What are we going to do?" The fog began to thicken, and we could hear whispers around us, voices that seemed to come from all directions. Fear was building in my chest, but the urgency of the situation made me act. We need to find that diary, I replied, determination rising within me. If the spirit Elias is right, it's the key to solving all of this. But how? Emily asked, looking around, clearly frightened. Let's search the cemetery. If the heart is where the diary is, maybe it's a central area. I tried to think of a place, but the fog made everything confusing. Look. Emily pointed. That hill seems higher and more central. We can start there. I agreed, and together we began to make our way toward the hill. Hashtag. As we walked, the whispers seemed to grow louder, as if the spirits were guiding or warning us. My heart raced, and doubt began to seep into my mind. Were we making the right choice? Jake, are you okay? Emily asked, noticing my silence. I'm just trying to understand all of this. I paused and looked into her eyes. You believe in this, don't you? I don't know, but I feel like we need to do this. She squeezed my hand, and her confidence encouraged me. If we don't try, we'll never know. With one last glance at the gravestones around us, we continued toward the hill. Fear was still present, but a new determination filled our steps. Whatever happened, we were in this together. And if the spirits were calling us, it was our responsibility to uncover the truth, not just for ourselves, but for all those who had suffered in silence. The spirit hovered in front of us, its ethereal form illuminated by the faint light of the moon filtering through the dense fog of the cemetery. Its features were indistinct, but there was a deep sadness in its eyes that made me hesitate. While I tried to process the gravity of the situation, Emily seemed to absorb every word, every nuance of what was happening. I am a guardian of forgotten truths, the spirit began, its voice echoing like a distant whisper, yet clear enough that I didn't miss a single syllable. There is a curse that feeds on the silence and fear that permeate this town. The dead cry out for justice, and those who remain silent perpetuate the pain. But, what do you want from us? I asked, incredulity still battling against the reality I was being forced to accept. I had always been skeptical, believing everything could be explained, but here I was, in a cemetery, facing a spirit that spoke of curses and hidden truths. You have the power to break the cycle, the spirit replied, gesturing with one translucent hand. But you must understand that the entire town is involved in this cover-up. The fear you feel is merely a reflection of what has already occurred. If you do not act, more tragedies will follow. Emily, by my side, was in shock, but at the same time, a spark of determination began to shine in her eyes. What happened here? What cover-up is this? Her voice trembled, but there was a firmness that couldn't be ignored. The spirit tilted its head, as if pondering the best way to continue. There was a murder, an innocent whose life was taken to protect the interests of many. The truth was buried along with him, and those who knew remained silent, fearing for their own lives. Now, the town is weighed down by this lie. You must bring to light what has been hidden. I looked at Emily, trying to gauge her reactions. Fear was present, but there was something more, a desire for justice. We need proof, I said, my mind spinning with the possibility that everything the spirit was saying could be true. If we're going to confront the town, we need something solid. Proof. The spirit seemed to consider the word, as if weighing its importance. You must search the library, in the old archives. The records are there, waiting to be discovered. The truth is written, but few dare to read it. The pressure in the air seemed to intensify, and I felt the whispers of the dead around us, as if they were urging us on, demanding that we do something. And if we find nothing? I asked, the doubt still fighting to be heard. What if this is all just an illusion? Then the town will remain in its prison of fear and silence, and more lives will be lost, the spirit replied, its voice now heavy with urgency. You have the opportunity to change this. Do not let courage slip away. Emily took a deep breath, and I watched her regain her composure. We need to go to the library now, she said, her voice firmer than before. We can't let this opportunity pass. We need to uncover the truth. The spirit nodded slowly. The hour is critical. Remember that what you discover may not only shock but also destabilize those who prefer to live in ignorance. Prepare yourselves for resistance. I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I had never imagined I would find myself involved in something so dark. And if the town doesn't believe us? I questioned, the seed of doubt still planted in my mind. Then seek the truth with courage. The truth is a blade that cuts through fear. And remember, the story of Willow Creek is not just the story of the living, but also of the dead who cry out for justice. The spirit's words resonated in my heart, and I realized the intensity of the situation was growing with each moment. "Let's go," Emily said, her determination now evident. "We can't waste any time. We need to get there before it's too late." I nodded, and together we began to move away from the grave where the spirit still lingered, its presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. The cemetery was shrouded in oppressive silence, but as we walked away, the whispers seemed to intensify, like a distant echo of voices that had never been heard. On the way to the library, the weight of responsibility began to settle on my shoulders. I was certain that the quiet life I led in Willow Creek was about to change forever. The story we were about to uncover could not only expose hidden truths but also transform how the town viewed itself. "Jake, are you okay?" Emily asked, noticing my contemplative silence. "I'm just thinking about what we might find," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "And what this could mean for all of us. We need to stay focused," she said, her voice steady. "If we find the proof we need, we can help the town break free from this cycle of fear." "And what if we don't succeed?" I asked, uncertainty creeping back in. "Then at least we'll know we tried," Emily replied. "And maybe, just maybe, it will inspire others to take the same path." The determination in her voice gave me a boost of courage, and soon we arrived at the library. The old building felt heavy with stories, and as we stepped inside, the smell of aged paper and dust enveloped us. It was a place that held secrets, and I hoped that today, those secrets would be willing to reveal themselves. "Let's look for records about the politician and the murder," Emily suggested, beginning to scan the shelves filled with dusty books. "All right," I agreed, trying to ignore the growing sense of nervousness in my stomach. "We can start with the municipal archive." We split up, and as I tried to focus on my search, the image of the spirit and its words echoed in my mind. I knew we were about to face something much larger than the two of us, and the weight of Willow Creek's history pressed down upon us. After some time searching, Emily returned with a stack of documents in her hands. "Look at this," she exclaimed, excitement evident in her voice. "These are records about a politician who disappeared decades ago. He was involved in a scandal that was never clarified." "Great, this could be exactly what we need," I said, examining the documents as she spread them out on the table. "Let's see if we can find any connection to what the spirit mentioned." As we examined the papers, a sense of urgency began to spread through the library. I could feel the pressure of the truth closing in, and the idea that the dead were crying out for justice was now more alive than ever in our minds. It was as if the town itself was watching us, waiting to see if we would have the courage to confront what lay hidden in the shadows. The tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. After everything we had discovered about the cemetery and the spirits calling for justice, we decided it was time to gather the residents of Willow Creek. It was an idea that sent a chill down my spine, but Emily seemed confident. ###, we need to tell the truth, Jake. They have the right to know," she said, gazing up at the overcast sky as if searching for answers among the clouds. I called a meeting in the small central square of the town, a space that had always been the beating heart of Willow Creek. The sun was starting to set, casting elongated shadows over the old buildings, and a cold wind blew, making the leaves of the trees dance. As the townspeople began to arrive, I noticed the hesitation on their faces. They were skeptical, and the distrust was palpable. I was still struggling to understand everything that had happened. "Jake! What are you doing here?" shouted Tom, one of the town's oldest residents, with his usual tone of disdain. He had always been a fierce critic of any change, and his incredulous expression was no surprise. "If you're here to talk about ghosts, forget it. We don't have time for that nonsense." "It's not nonsense, Tom," I retorted, trying to contain my frustration. "If you're willing to listen, Emily and I discovered something really serious about what's going on in the cemetery." I looked around, seeking support in the expressions of others. "The dead are crying out for justice. We can't ignore this." The crowd murmured, a mix of confusion and skepticism. "Justice? What exactly do you mean by that?" asked Clara, a gray-haired woman who had always been one of the most respected voices in the community. Her concern was evident, but there was a glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. "We found out there's a curse tied to the cemetery, and the strange events happening aren't mere coincidences," Emily interjected, her voice firm and resolute. "The spirits aren't at peace, and we need to help them find rest. The truth about our town's past must be revealed." "This is madness!" Tom exclaimed, shaking his head. "Do you really think a handful of tombstones and old stories can affect us? What do you intend to do, scare people even more?" "We're trying to prevent more tragedies, Tom," I said, attempting to remain as calm as possible in the face of resistance. "If we don't act, what else could happen? We've already seen graves disturbed, people disappearing, and a climate of fear spreading through the town." The crowd began to stir, and I realized that the more we spoke, the more anxious they seemed. "If this is true, why weren't we warned before?" a younger man shouted, his voice choked with anger. "Why are you two here now, trying to tell us what to do?" "Because we know, and you need to know too," Emily replied, raising her voice to be heard. "We can't keep living with this weight in our hearts. It's time to face the truth, even if it means confronting the past." Tension escalated with each passing moment, and the crowd seemed to divide between those willing to listen and those who preferred to ignore. In a moment of silence following Emily's last statement, I heard the whisper of the wind as if it were carrying the laments of the dead. It was then I realized that the resistance was not just against us, but against the very truth they feared. "Do you really think this will help?" Tom insisted, crossing his arms. "The dead can't help us. And if we open this Pandora's box, who knows what might come out of it? If we do nothing, Tom, what do you think will happen?" I replied, frustration building inside me. "The town is in danger. We can't keep ignoring what's happening in the cemetery. We need to act, and we need to do it together." "But why should we trust you?" Clara asked, her voice softer but still filled with distrust. "What guarantees us that this story isn't just an invention?" "Because I'm a lawyer. And I'm not here to play games. I'm here because people are suffering, and the dead are crying out for justice. We need to uncover the truth and confront what really happened," I said, my gaze fixed on Clara, searching for a sign of understanding. "Do you really believe that?" Tom asked, his expression softening slightly. "Because if you're wrong, we'll all pay the price for your curiosity." "It's not just curiosity, it's a responsibility," Emily interjected, her voice filled with determination. "If the town continues to ignore the pain that the dead feel, what will happen to us? We need to face this together." The crowd began murmuring again, and I noticed the tension transforming into something else. Some people seemed interested, while others remained opposed. "If you want the town to believe you, you'll have to present concrete evidence. We can't just accept empty words," said an older man, his gaze piercing. "Let's go to the cemetery together," I suggested, feeling a wave of courage. "Let us show you what we found. Give us a chance to explain everything we know. If you still don't believe us, then you can reject us. But if there's any truth, we can't afford to ignore it." "And what if there's nothing there?" Tom asked, still skeptical. "What if this is all just a grand illusion? Then at least we'll know we tried, Emily replied, her voice firm. What do we have to lose? What's scarier, facing the unknown or living with the fear of what might be lurking in the shadows? I realized that Emily had touched on something profound. The fear that dominated the town wasn't just about ghosts, but about the truth that could come to light. Let's go to the cemetery, I said again, trying to capture the crowd's attention. Let's see what's really happening there. We can't keep living in fear. We need to confront this head-on. A silence hung over the square, and then one voice stood out. It was Clara. I'll go with you, she said, and her declaration sounded like a breath of hope in the air. If there's something wrong, we need to find out. We can't let fear control us. Others began to speak up, some agreeing and others still hesitating. If Clara is going, then I will too, a young man said, and gradually, more people began to join in. The resistance was starting to break, but there was still a sense of fragility in the air. But we need all of you, I said, looking at the crowd. If we're not together, we won't be able to face what's to come. Let's go to the cemetery, and if we go together, we can uncover the truth and restore peace in Willow Creek. And so, with renewed courage and determination to face the unknown, we began to make our way to the cemetery. With each step, the tension became more palpable, but there was also a feeling of hope starting to form. What had once seemed a burden was now transforming into a collective quest for truth, a joint effort to confront the ghosts of the past and bring to light what lay hidden in the shadows of Willow Creek. Night had fallen heavily over Willow Creek, and the atmosphere was charged with an uncomfortable silence. The wind blew, carrying with it the whispers of the dead that seemed to echo in my mind. Sitting on the couch in Emily's living room, I looked at her, who was lost in thought. The revelation we had just made about her grandmother still hung between us like a dark cloud. It can't be true, Emily murmured, as if trying to convince herself. My grandmother, she was always such a respectable woman. How could she be involved in something so terrible? Emily, the documents we found are clear. Your grandmother played a pivotal role in the cover-up. We need to face this head-on, I said, trying to maintain a calm tone despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Emily got up, pacing back and forth, and I watched her, feeling her despair. I can't believe she would do that. She always told me stories about Willow Creek's past but never mentioned anything that could tarnish our family. Maybe she didn't want you to know. It's a painful truth, but it's the reality. We need to understand what happened. Hashtag, 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 if we don't do this, the spirits will continue to torment us, and the town will pay a heavy price, I replied, trying to convince her. She paused, staring at me with tear-filled eyes. But how can I face this? How can I deal with the fact that my family, the person I admired, was involved in something so horrific? I know it's hard, but you're not alone in this. We're in this together. We need to uncover the truth. Whatever happened, we must bring it to light. It's the only way to find peace, I said, trying to comfort her. She took a deep breath and nodded. You're right. I can't let fear paralyze me. If my grandmother really had a role in this, then we need to understand her motives. We need to know what led her down this path. The determination in Emily's eyes gave me a glimmer of hope. Let's go through the documents again. There might be something else we can discover, some clue that helps us understand what happened. We returned to the table where the papers were scattered, each telling a part of Willow Creek's forgotten history. As Emily examined the documents, I couldn't help but notice the expression of pain on her face. It was as if she were trying to piece together a puzzle that should never have existed. Jake, look at this, Emily said, pointing to a passage in one of the documents. It mentions a secret meeting that took place at my grandmother's house. They were discussing what to do about the scandal, and it mentions a necessary sacrifice. Those words left me unsettled. A sacrifice? What could that mean? I don't know, but it seems they were willing to do anything to protect their interests. And my grandmother was right in the middle of it, Emily said, her voice trembling. If we can figure out who else was at the meeting, maybe we can understand what really happened and your grandmother's role in all of this, I suggested. Yes, that could be the key to understanding the entire situation, Emily agreed, her determination returning. Let's go to the library tomorrow. We need to research the residents of the town back then and see if we can find more information about that meeting. The thought of going to the library made me feel a bit more at ease. The atmosphere there could serve as a refuge amidst the chaos we were facing. Great. Let's prepare for a long day of research. And remember, we're not alone in this. There's a lot at stake here, and together we're stronger. Emily smiled, though the sadness still lingered in her eyes. Thank you, Jake. I honestly don't know what I would do without you by my side. That night, as we prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something significant, something that would change our lives forever. The connection between our families felt stronger than ever, and the weight of the history we carried was almost tangible. The next morning, we woke up early, determined. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the soft morning light felt promising. We headed to the library, where the smell of old books and the reverent silence created an ideal environment for research. Let's start with the old newspapers, I suggested as Emily made her way to the archives section. They always cover important events in the town. If the meeting your grandmother attended was significant, there should be some mention of it. Emily agreed, and soon we found a stack of newspapers. We began flipping through them, searching for any reference to that scandal. The work was tedious, but with each page turned, our anticipation grew. Look at this! Emily exclaimed, her eyes shining with discovery. There's a footnote about a man's death. He was involved in a political scandal, and a group of people gathered to discuss how to hide the truth. This could be the meeting we were looking for. Let's check the date, I said, leaning over the newspaper. It's from 1953. That fits the timeline, Emily replied, her face lighting up with the find. And here it mentions a sacrifice that was decided to ensure the truth wouldn't come out. That's exactly what we were looking for. We need to find out who those people were. If your grandmother was involved, who else was? I pondered. We continued to search for information, and with every new piece we uncovered, the connection to the past became clearer. Finally, we found a list of names that were present at the meeting. My heart raced when I saw a familiar name. Emily, look at this. Your grandfather's name is here too. I said, almost in disbelief. My grandfather? But he always talked about the importance of honesty and justice. How could he be involved in something like this? Emily exclaimed, the desperation in her voice intensifying. Maybe he was trying to protect his family. It could be that he didn't agree with what was happening but felt he had no choice. We need to learn more about this, I suggested. Let's keep searching. If we can understand what really happened, maybe we can find a way to confront the town, Emily said, her determination returning. The day flew by as we delved into information about Willow Creek's past. With every new discovery, the town's history grew more complex and engaging, and the tension between us heightened. When we finally decided to stop, we were exhausted but satisfied with our progress. Jake, I really feel like we're getting close to the truth. We have to do this for those who can no longer speak, Emily said, passion igniting in her eyes. Yes, and we can't afford to give up now. But we need to be careful. What we uncover might have significant consequences, I replied, considering the possible reactions from the town. I know. But I also know that the truth needs to come out. We can't let fear stop us from acting, she said, firm in her conviction. We left the library with the feeling that we were closer to uncovering the truth, but the shadow of the past still lingered with us. Whatever our research revealed, we knew we were about to enter unknown territory, a place where the ghosts of history cried out for justice. The tension hung heavy in the air as we prepared to face the town and reveal the truth. Emily and I found ourselves in the cemetery, surrounded by an atmosphere that seemed to pulsate with the energy of the dead. The cold that had once unsettled me now felt almost oppressive, as if the cemetery itself was pressing us to act. The thick fog covering the graves appeared to ripple, as if it were alive, and I sensed that the ghosts were closer than ever. "Jake, are you ready for this?" Emily asked, her voice barely masking the tremor that ran through her. She looked at me with a mixture of determination and fear, and I knew she felt the weight of what we were about to do. "Ready or not, we don't have a choice," I replied, trying to stay composed. "We need to find out what really happened here. We can't let the town continue living in a lie." We both understood that revealing Emily's grandmother's involvement in a cover-up would change everything. It was a burden that weighed heavily on us, but the urgency of the situation wouldn't allow us to hesitate. The ghosts were crying out for justice, and we were the messengers of that truth. As we walked toward the heart of the cemetery, the voices of the dead seemed to intensify, whispering in a haunting chorus. "Jake, can you hear that?" Emily murmured, her hands trembling at my side. "Yes, it's like they know we're here," I replied, my heart racing. "We need to find the diary. It's our only chance to understand all of this." Finally, we arrived at a small mausoleum covered in moss and ivy. The door was ajar, and a cold breeze emanated from within, as if the very place was inviting us inside. Emily hesitated for a moment, but I placed my hand on her back, urging her to move forward. "Let's go," I said, resolute. "The truth is inside." We stepped into the mausoleum, and the darkness nearly engulfed us. The walls were covered in cobwebs, and the smell of mold was strong. With the light from our lanterns, we searched for any sign of the diary. The atmosphere was thick with a strange energy, as if the spirits were watching us, waiting for us to uncover what we needed. "Look!" Emily exclaimed, pointing to an old table covered in dust. There was a wooden box, adorned with details that seemed to have been hand-carved. I approached, feeling my heart race. Upon opening the box, we found the diary. The cover was worn, and the pages were yellowed with age. "This is it," Emily said, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and fear. "This could contain everything we need to know." I began to flip through the pages, and the words started to form in my mind, revealing secrets that had been buried for decades. "Here," I said, pointing to a passage. "It talks about an incident, a covered-up murder. Emily's grandmother was involved in all of this." Emily stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the words. "But this doesn't make sense," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She never mentioned anything about this. Why would she hide it? Maybe she was trying to protect you. Or the town," I suggested, but a feeling of unease grew within me. "But that doesn't change the fact that the truth needs to be revealed." It was then, as I turned a few more pages, that I found a passage that made me stop. "She mentions a spirit," I said, my voice trembling. "A spirit that cried out for justice, and that manipulated events to ensure the truth would come to light." Emily fell silent, the lantern light illuminating her face, which had taken on an expression of horror. "You're saying my grandmother, that she's behind all of this? That she is the spirit crying out for justice?" "That seems to be the case," I replied, feeling the weight of the revelation. "She may have been responsible for keeping this secret hidden, but now it seems she is trying to redeem herself." "We need to confront her," Emily said, her tone resolute. "We can't let this continue. We can't allow the town to suffer any longer because of what she did." "But how?" She's dead," I hesitated. "How can we confront her?" Emily looked at the diary, and in a moment of clarity, said, "If she really is the spirit crying out for justice, maybe we can connect with her. If we can understand her motivations, we could free her and, at the same time, reveal the truth to the town. Are you willing to do that?" I asked, concerned. "This could be dangerous." "I am. We need to do this, Jake. For all those who suffered because of this lie, she replied, her determination inspiring me. We decided to perform a simple ritual, an attempt to connect with the spirit of her grandmother. Emily found some candles in the mausoleum and lit one, placing it in the center of the room. "Let's focus. Let's call her," she said. We closed our eyes and began to speak, invoking the spirit of Emily's grandmother. "If you are here, please manifest. We need to understand your pain," Emily declared, her voice reverberating in the dark space. The temperature dropped abruptly, and a presence began to form around us. The mist that had previously shrouded the cemetery seemed to gather around us, and an ethereal figure began to take shape before us. It was a woman with gray hair, her expression sad yet filled with wisdom. "Why have you called me?" her voice echoed, soft and melancholic. "I am the guardian of the secrets of Willow Creek." "Are you Emily's grandmother?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," she replied, looking at Emily with deep love. "I did what I did to protect those I loved. But the weight of my actions has condemned me. Why did you cover up the truth?" Emily asked, her voice choked with emotion. "Why didn't you reveal what happened? I thought that by keeping silent, I would be protecting the town. But silence became a curse," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "The spirits cry out for justice, and I cannot rest until the truth is revealed." "So, what must we do?" I asked, my heart racing with the gravity of the situation. "Reveal the truth," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Confront those who are still alive and who participated in the cover-up. Free those who are trapped by fear. Only then can I find peace." "We will do this," Emily promised, determination reflecting in her gaze. "We will reveal the truth. For you and for all those who suffered." At that moment, the figure began to dissipate, but before she completely vanished, Emily's grandmother looked at us one last time. "Thank you, for freeing me," she said, and the sorrow in her voice was replaced by a faint smile. When the mist finally cleared, we both stood in silence, absorbing the weight of the revelation. A path lay ahead, filled with challenges, but now we knew what we needed to do. We were ready to face the town, to confront those involved in the cover-up, and restore the truth that had been buried for so long. "Let's go," I said, looking at Emily. "It's time to reveal what we've discovered. It's time to bring light to Willow Creek."